Representatives from the Refugee Advice and Casework Service, thank you for your time. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. My name is Kimberly Kitching. I'm the chair of the committee. Joining us today, we have Senator Abetz, the deputy chair, as well as Senators Antic, Fawcett, Fierravanti-Wells, Lambie, Rice and Steele-John. For the Hansard record, could you each please state your full name and the capacity in which you're appearing today?
My name is Sarah Dale. I'm the Centre Director and Principal Solicitor of the Refugee Advice and Casework Service. I want to thank you all for having me today.
Thank you.
My name is Arif Hussain. I'm a senior lawyer at the Refugee Advice and Casework Service. Thank you for having me too.
Thank you. Would you like to make a brief opening statement and then the committee can proceed to questions?
We would, Senator, yes, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
So RACS is a community legal centre based in Sydney that provides critical free legal advice, assistance and representation for financially disadvantaged and vulnerable people seeking asylum in Australia. We advocate for policies that treats all refugees with justice, dignity and respect. RACS has a long history of assisting people from Afghanistan who have sought asylum in Australia. Over its 34 years, RACS has assisted thousands of people from Afghanistan who have fled Afghanistan due to ongoing war and insecurity. We stand with the community of Afghanistan and particularly those who fear persecution under a Taliban rule. We stand with the ethnic and religious minorities. We stand with the broader diaspora, the Hazaras, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Turkmens, the Sikhs, just to name a few. We stand with women and children at exceptional risk. We stand with the human rights defenders and those who have fought to advance the rights for all in Afghanistan. We stand with those who have served alongside Australian forces. We stand with those who have particular fears due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. We stand with those who have been forced from their lands and watch in horror as the country faces almost universal hunger and poverty by mid-2022. At RACS, we work to support the right for all who flee Afghanistan due to persecution to find safety in Australia.
Australia's 20-year military engagement in Afghanistan was our longest war. In those 20 years, more than 39,000 Australian Defence Force personnel were deployed to Afghanistan. 41 Australian lives were lost in the 20-year war. Since the US-led intervention began, approximately 50,000 civilians in Afghanistan were also killed. In the same period, we saw millions of Afghans being internally displaced and being forced to flee Afghanistan and finding their way to places like Australia. Thousands of people from Afghanistan fleeing the Taliban and the insecurity in Afghanistan have also made it to Australia.
After the Taliban forcibly took over Afghanistan on 15 August 2021, the current demand for RACS services increased substantially. Calls to our service doubled in the first month. We work to support aid organisations and charities who sought to have their staff and vulnerable persons in their care evacuated. We worked with members of the community here in Australia who sought to find safety for their family members and loved ones. We were also contacted directly by those on the ground in Afghanistan. The common theme across all these experiences was a lack of transparency. How did people get evacuated? Who do you call? How do you reach DFAT? Or is it indeed the Department of Home Affairs? I have a visa application already on foot. Do I need to make one afresh? I'm not sure of my situation. I've emailed but no response. I called the number given when approaching Abbey Gate, but nobody's answering. There were multiple meetings, Zooms and calls with various members of Parliament, community leaders and others. It was confused chaos here in Australia of promises without plans. There was a sense that you needed to get onto lists, but how? Who held these lists and where did these lists go? As a legal service whose very purpose is to support refugees and people seeking asylum, the very people impacted, we weren't consulted nor advised until long after the fact. We are here to support an at-risk community and could have been better utilised to support and to deliver information, to advise on processes and temper expectations and anxieties. But we too were left in the dark to decipher such processes on our own.
We recognise the government's commitment of funding to resettlement services, mental health services, community-led services and legal services. We welcome this announcement and hope that to be considered in the assistance of our community. In response to this crisis, RACS has introduced 2 new services, one to support the hundreds of people seeking RACS assistance to make applications to the Special Humanitarian Program, and the other to support recent evacuees, whilst also continuing to support those whom we already have in Australia prior to the fall of Kabul. We also recognize the government's commitment to those evacuated to access permanency. We welcome wholeheartedly, but await the detail of the process, and would implore the government to ensure that the process must ensure that all applicants are afforded due process, such as access to merits review and appeals. We continue to stress there are thousands of people here who will only be afforded temporary visa, likely never gain permanent residency in Australia. It is not sufficient for a commitment not to return anyone to Afghanistan whilst it is unstable. Those that are here are also duly affected by the crisis. Their families are living in fear. They too need permanent pathways. Currently, as of 31st of August 2021, there are 4,427 people from Afghanistan on temporary protection visas who are recognized as refugees. These are the people that also require attention from the Australian government and should be granted permanent protections.
We will just take 2 more minutes, Senator, just to finalise our statements. The point is that it's important to recognise our engagement goes beyond the lands of Afghanistan, and we must also consider our engagement to support those from Afghanistan here in Australia too. We note the department's earlier evidence in regards to the 26,000 applications made to the Department of Home Affairs under the Special Humanitarian Program. On this, we seek to make the following observations. Firstly, we reflect on the fact that those on temporary visas, and in particular those on TPVs and CHEVs, have no option but to apply for their families under this scheme, as they are not eligible to apply through our family stream processes. Secondly, thousands of others who arrived in Australia by boat, despite being permanent visa holders, are affected by Direction 80, rendering their applications to be treated with the lowest priority processing. It is RAC's observation that our refugee policies are key contributors to this demand. If all refugees were eligible and had timely access to family reunification, there would be less pressure on the Special Humanitarian Program, for which for many it is the only affordable also option. We also wish to note that biometrics and health checks will be a process requiring completion before a grant of a visa. We would encourage the government to consider expediting visa grants for immediate family members, waiving the need for health and biometric tests, given they will remain impossible for those that remain in Afghanistan. We suggest the government consider working with a third country to arrange interim access or processing, or more preferably, waiving these checks to be completed onshore here in Australia during a quarantine period on arrival. Finally, we also wish to reflect on the pain in the community here in Australia. Whilst we acknowledge the increased commitment from the government to support mental health services, we fear this simply will not be an answer. There are significant concerns for the mental health of those on temporary visas in particular. At RACS, we have heard the calls of desperation from TPV holders and citizens alike. However, there is still hope the government will listen to the calls of the community, that the vague commitments will enliven promises, that people will have their families join them here in safety. It is RAC's fear that this hope currently dissipates some of that distress. Once processes begin and cases are rejected due to a minimal commitment and the reality that families will remain separated is clear, so too will the hurt in our community surge.
It is apparent that 3,000 humanitarian places is grossly insufficient. We also question the need to include locally engaged employees in these quotas when given that they have served alongside Australia. It is the least we can do to live up to our promises to protect them. When offering places, it should be taken into account all those we haven't already made commitments to. Despite commitments that the intake will increase, we have not heard anything tangible, anything that reflects the horrors we knew, the horrors that we are seeing every day right now. So far, the steps taken do not begin to address the need. It does not recognize our relationship with the conflict. It does not recognize nor respect the immense contributions the Afghanistan community has made in Australia. It does not recognize that Australia or the Australians are calling on the government to assist their families. When Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced our complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, like his international counterparts in the UK and Canada, he specifically mentioned that Australia remains committed to helping Afghanistan preserve the gains of the last 20 years, particularly for women and girls. Our international partners like the UK and Canada have already announced that they will take 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan. Canada has recently doubled their intake. So far, we have not seen any actions or commitments from the Australian government that matches our 2 decades of engagement in Afghanistan. We have not seen any actions or commitments that matches the promises that we made to the Afghan people in our longest war. We have a moral obligation to respond to the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison must announce and commit to a significant increase of our humanitarian intake, preferably a substantial multi-year commitment. We need to see those in Australia on temporary protection visas afforded permanency. We need to see efficient family reunion. We need to see the world not leave behind the people of Afghanistan, including Australia.
Thank you. We await your questions.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Lambie first. I think she has questions. Senator Lambie.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering what NGOs are still left in Afghanistan that you're aware of, and how much information are you actually getting from the ground over there compared to what you're getting from here?
Perhaps I can answer that question for you, Arif. So there are a number of organisations that we've continued to support, and given the legal privilege, I can't necessarily share their names, but I do note that one will be giving evidence following ourselves. RACS is definitely receiving requests from a number of NGOs and international NGOs, might I add, that are asking for our assistance to assist people that they're working with on the ground in Afghanistan. As part of our processes, Senator Lambie, we speak to people in Afghanistan. We also speak to their family members here in Australia. So we, as our service, we are taking instructions both from people in Australia, but also on the ground in Afghanistan. And, you know, the fear is a very real one from the conversations that we're having at RACS.
What about, okay, so Canada have offered to take so many, somebody else has offered to take so many. You're obviously going to leave a lot out. You're going to leave a lot out. There's going to be certain people that are picked for those positions and not. What's your take on that?
I think my take on that is that so far what we have committed is not good enough. There's always going to be people who we can't help, but the point is that we have an obligation, given our 20-year war, to do the bare minimum, which is what the UK and Canada have done, which is to have a one-off additional humanitarian intake for those most at risk.
I guess to that point also, Senator Lambie, we've already made a commitment to several thousand people. We've granted 449s to people we recognise needed urgent evacuation. We've made commitment to those locally engaged employees, and I want to stress that absolutely as we should. We should be taking every step possible to evacuate those that we've already made commitments to. Our fear is that the current quotas really only cover those that we've made commitments to. It's not really, it's a drop in the ocean compared to what the need will be. It's not going to address family reunification. It's not going to address additional NGOs, additional staff, additional human rights defenders. Really, the current quota that's been offered by the government is not even going to cover all the people we've made commitments to, which is why we really need that increase. And I fully accept that Australia is not going to solve the global issue of the crisis in Afghanistan, but that shouldn't be a reason that we don't do more. And is that not proportionate to our engagement?
Does that not cause friction with the family members that some get out and some don't? What is the repercussions of that?
Well, it's hard to know, but from our perspective, we have made a commitment to we had a 20-year commitment to the war in Afghanistan. We made promises to people. We can do the very least of taking those most at risk. And once people are out here, for example, those on 449s, if they're allowed to apply for a permanent residency or a permanent protection visa, it's possible that they could engage in terms of getting family members who are left back home to reunite. So this is a part of that discussion that we had earlier, that family reunification visas for Afghans living in Australia, those who are recently evacuated, and also those who have been living here for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, should be more efficient.
What about, can you tell me what's going on over there now, like with the girls and their schooling, the face coverings? Have we moved back and lost 20 years over there? Has it actually gone back to where it was 20 years ago? Are we there yet?
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah. So I think the issue here is that there's been a lot of gains in the last 20 years, and it's been done with the help of the Australia's involvement there, but women in Afghanistan, girls in Afghanistan also really fought really hard for those gains. So we had women who are leading political movements, women lecturing universities, and about 27% of the parliament made up of women in Afghanistan, right? So that was what Afghanistan was just before August 2021. Right now, there is a lot of talk about Taliban 2.0, that just because they're on social media and things like that they have changed. The evidence that we see right now is that nothing has changed about the Taliban, the current Taliban versus the Taliban that was in power in the 1990s. So currently, in most places in Afghanistan, girls are not allowed to go to school. If you see the recent interim cabinet released by the Taliban, most of them are men from one particular ethnic group, and there is no woman included. So it is clear that the gains that we talked about, the gains that the Prime Minister talked about, that we will continue to maintain and we will continue to be there for women and girls, have gone, and now it's time for us to do something about it and to try, at very least, to try to get as many people at risk out of Afghanistan as possible.
That's only a small contingent. Do you have a plan B?
From the RAC's perspective, we are a legal service, a legal service in Sydney, that we try to assist people to seek asylum and through the humanitarian process. So that's where we come from. I think others who are giving evidence today might have other things to say about long term.
Can you, one of you tell me what was the effect of closing the embassy on the NGOs that are still over there? Because I imagine that would have been quite difficult. And do you have any idea how many NGOs are still actually on the ground that haven't been pushed out? Do you have any sort of stats of what is there, half of them left on the ground, 25% of them? Are you hearing anything about that?
I'll let Sarah answer that.
Certainly the NGOs that we were working with during the evacuation, as far as I'm aware, most of them still have staff and people that they're supporting. And again, I know that the NGOs are giving their evidence later today and are better to speak to that. In terms of the impact of the embassy closing, I think it's important that the embassy closing had an impact not only on the NGOs, but also on many visa holders, Australian citizens, permanent residents also in Afghanistan. As I mentioned in our opening remarks, the issue with the fall of Kabul was, people were calling RACs, asking us, who do we call, who do we contact? Our natural response as legal advisors in this process is to contact the Embassy of Australia in Afghanistan, or the country which you are remaining. The fact that the embassy was closed, the fact that there wasn't an alternative, the fact that we as legal representatives didn't have a contact point or someone to speak to when this hit is a real issue. And I think that, the point of the embassy closing is a really important one, Senator Lambie, because it had repercussions for many. And really, I believe that it had repercussions in terms of the evacuation and why it was so chaotic.
So I'm not sure, and you don't have to give me the number, but I imagine you have quite a few on your books at the moment. Are you having any Is there any liaisoning with the government? Is anybody in the government bothering to coming to speak to you or anything like that?
So at present, RACS has a waiting list of in excess of 700 people that have registered for assistance to bring their families, loved ones or colleagues. So we have a very extensive demand on our service for assistance through the Special Humanitarian Program. Do we have contact with the Department of Home Affairs? We do. We are now able to speak to them. We do have contacts within the department, but we would advocate for a more transparent process, so that it's not just the lucky few that are able to access a free legal service. It's not just those that can afford private representation. What I stress is that it's incredibly difficult to contact the Department of Home Affairs. It's incredibly difficult to contact the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it shouldn't just be the fact that I've been doing this for 10 decades, so I know a few people in the department. We need a transparent process where people are responded to appropriately.
So, so they haven't set up a support group within Home Affairs or anything else. I mean, this is fairly big what's going on. They put on no extra personnel, no support group in there that's actually just involved in Afghanistan itself. Is that what you're getting? Like, what's the reply here? Like, what's the response? They just go, yes, no worries, thanks for that, and that's about as far as it goes? How receptive are they actually being?
To our experience, there isn't, a legal advisory group. There hasn't been an opportunity for us to, feed into suggestions for the process, for instance, in a formalised manner. Does our organisation have a relationship with certain directors of the Department of Home Affairs? Yes, we do. Are we treated with respect, and do they engage with us? Yes, they do. Do we think that should go further, and should there be a process whereby there is that advisory panel where there is an opportunity for feedback? Yes, we do. I think over a number of years, engagement, particularly between the legal sector and the Department of Home Affairs, has certainly not been as collaborative as it has been perhaps in the past 12 months. And I would stress that it needs to go further so that we can adequately address this crisis, and that we are really considering all the factors in this. I heard our previous colleagues, the Law Council, they were discussing with you the ins and outs of bar lifts and visa deadlines and application dates. I don't wish to add any further to that other than to support everything that they had said. But this is an incredibly complicated process. However, I would also like to relay that we've been working with refugees, as I've said, at RACS for 34 years in terms of overcoming identity documentation issues, in terms of overcoming family unit definitions, in terms of overcoming raising of claims. We have that expertise, and we are prepared to assist the government when it comes to establishing a fair process.
As that process rolls on, what are your chances of actually getting these people out of there?
I think it goes to your question that you asked. Like there is a need, an important need for the department or the government to set up some processes, especially given that there are around 1,500 449 holders in Afghanistan right now who contact services like ours and are asking about what should they do. So there is a real crucial need. We don't have the answers to that. It's up to the government to provide those answers about what they're going to do going forward, and in terms of the visa applications and the people that they've provided letters and 449s to in Afghanistan who are currently right there.
Oh, so you've got no clear direction on that either?
As in, the information that we receive are from people in Afghanistan right now who call us or relatives call us. They're saying we have this 449, but it's about to expire. We don't know how to exercise our right to this visa. And the response so far has been that the Department of Immigration, if they contact you about that, that's the only avenue that they can raise any issues. Otherwise, the people who are on these visas in Afghanistan are left to their own devices.
What about
Senator Landy, could I just, how much longer do you need? Senator Rice has some questions.
One more. Thank you, Chair. Just going forward, the longer these interpreters and others stay in there, what's the chance of them surviving?
We're already hearing, threat letters being given to interpreters, people who work with the international forces in various capacities, not just interpreters, just embassy staffs. And I think as time goes on, and as the attention of the West and Western media draws away from Afghanistan, it's likely that we will see an increased persecution targeting of people who helped the many Western countries that were there, including those that Australia engaged locally.
I think it's also important to just quickly, if I may, reflect that there was, a female activist shot over the weekend for the work that she had done to advance women's rights. So this is certainly no longer a theoretical risk. This is a risk that we are watching unfold before our very eyes.
Thank you so much to both of you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Lambie. Senator Rice.
Thanks, Chair. And look, thank you very much, Ms Dale and Mr Ayling, for your evidence today, for your comprehensive submission and your comprehensive evidence today. And I know we're running short on time, so look, I'll keep my questions brief. You talk about the massive extra workload that you've taken on, and I really want to thank you for that. Where is the resourcing coming from in terms of enabling you to deal with that extra caseload? Or are you just having to work twice as hard?
I think it's a little of column A, a little of column B. Certainly when the crisis first hit, it was that we were all just working doubly as hard. I'd like to, because I have this platform, really acknowledge the support that we receive from our volunteers that were working as doubly hard, our staff that was working as doubly hard. Initially, it was something that we just had to do because there wasn't an alternative. We are a charity, and so we do receive donations, and we receive support from family foundations and others who have committed to support RACS to be able to staff some of this need. I have noted in our submission, and I made representations to a number of people during this crisis, that RACS is a service that does not have access to funded interpreting. This is an incredible cost that RACS is currently incurring, and we're doing so because it is the right thing to do, and we see that we have a moral obligation also to act. But this is a real stress on a service like RACS that is not being funded at a time that this crisis has hit.
Do you get any government funding?
We receive funding largely through New South Wales Legal Aid is our funding for government funding.
And have you had any extra, in terms of, so you haven't received any federal government funding to help you cope with the massively increased workload?
We've not received any additional federal funding, and nor have we received any access to funded interpreting despite multiple requests.
Okay, thank you. Continuing on with resources, you talk about the issue of it, the current processes when people are sort of left in the dark, they don't know what's happening with their visa application. It's very difficult, incredibly difficult, I think, with your words, as to sort of engage with the Department of Home Affairs. Have you seen evidence of increased resourcing being put into these visa applications, or what level of extra resourcing do you think is actually needed in order for us to be fulfilling our moral obligation to be accepting more humanitarian visa applicants?
In terms of resourcing, I mean, that's a question for the Department of Home Affairs, and certainly what we have experienced over the years is that that resourcing has decreased substantially. A very basic thing that RACS would do is apply for a Freedom of Information application to get documents for people. That process should take 30 days. That process usually takes months. Certainly for us in the Special Humanitarian Program at the moment, we made applications as Kabul fell in those very early weeks in August, and I have only yesterday received an acknowledgement to that application. So that's several months of waiting to even have the Department of Home Affairs confirm that they received an application. So it's clearly apparent from the outside that significant resourcing is going to be needed by the Department of Home Affairs, and I would defer to them as to what that staffing looks like. But definitely from our perspective, there is additional support that is needed.
Thank you. Look, Clyde, my final question, knowing that we are short on time, is that, given as you so eloquently and coherently outline in your submission and in your evidence today of the need for us to be accepting more humanitarian refugees here in Australia, and that we are not doing enough, what are the implications to Australia's reputation, both for the people that we have that moral obligation to in Afghanistan, and more broadly, the fact that we are dragging our heels and clearly not keeping up with what we should be doing and what other countries like Canada, like the US, like the UK are doing?
Look, I think that the inaction of the government in response to the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is keeping within theme. Our humanitarian intake for 2020-2021 financial year has been the lowest in a few decades. And the way that we treat people who are already here, let's just leave the part around additional humanitarian intake aside, but people who are already here, who have lived out their lives for the last 8 years in Australia, they continue to face a constant limbo and a cloud over their heads around when they could be returned to Afghanistan, despite the Taliban taking over. There's no commitments made to never returning them to Afghanistan and giving them permanent protection visa. So it is, given that the UK, Canada, and the US have done their part and increased their humanitarian intake, it is damaging to Australia's reputation as a middle power and as a responsible global citizen to not do anything in response to the humanitarian crisis, given that the part that we played in the 20-year war. And especially the inaction around, we heard Jason Skanes this morning give evidence around the issues he faced around getting interpreters out, those issues around those who helped us, those Afghans who fought alongside us, and not doing anything substantial to help or continue helping evacuating those is also very damaging, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
If I might also just make a very brief point on that, and that is just reflecting on the family separation, that, we've left people separated from their families for a decade and likely longer given this crisis. Countries such as Ireland, I've discovered, have now established an entirely new process recognising that there are people in the Irish community that have family in Afghanistan that won't necessarily fall within their family stream process, so have established an entirely new process just to respond to this crisis. There is examples around the world of acting compassionately and acting expeditiously, and Australia absolutely has the capacity to do so.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Rice. Could I thank you very much for your time and for your submission, for the evidence you've given us. It's vital for the committee, for our interim report, so we thank you very much. Just for housekeeping for the committee, if we could resume I'll suspend now and we'll resume at 1:20.